Hello, this is Brian. Today is Tuesday, January 2nd, 2024, and I'm here in the Walker Preserve between the cities of Lakeside and Santee here in San Diego County, Southern California. Today it's time for a Trees of San Diego County episode. And today I want to focus on this graceful, beautiful, luscious, awesome tree here. And this is Peruvian Peppertree, Schinus molle. Beautiful, graceful, small to medium-sized evergreen tree, fairly long-lived. It is a member of the Cashew Family, the Anacardiaceae. The Peruvian Peppertree is often known as the California Peppertree, despite not being native here. And these trees of San Diego County episodes generally focus on our landscape trees. So that's what we have here. One of our first landscape trees here, first non-natives to be cultivated as a landscape tree here in Southern California. This tree is native to South America, Peru, and has a deceptively delicate habit. And what I mean by deceptively delicate is that this tree looks so graceful, flowing. It might appear that it's one of those delicate willow-like trees, but this is not a delicate tree. This is a very hardy tree. And it's hardy to drought, really hardy to heat. And it persists for quite a long time. These trees can live over probably a couple hundred years at least, I believe. These trees have been cultivated since, I believe, the 17 or 1800s. Are people coming up? I believe the Spanish were the ones who brought this tree here to cultivate back in the missionary times, I believe. But just look how graceful and beautiful these trees are. Usually multi-trunked, sometimes very wide trunked too. Sometimes these trees can have some very wide bases, especially when they get old. But these trees seldom get over 35, 40 feet tall. So they're still classified as small trees, but sometimes their bases get quite large. So let's go start looking at some of the characteristics of the Peruvian pepper tree. Let's go start at the trunk of the tree. These trees here have kind of flaky, stringy, furrowed bark, and cut areas and injured areas often exude sap because this is a very resinous tree, and the resin does have a quite strong smell, quite fragrant smell too. This is a very fragrant tree. And then, as you can see here, a lot of resin here, a lot of resin. These trees, like I said, very resinous, a lot of sap oozing from them. And then they got these very graceful, delicate, pinnately compound leaves. So I'm going to try to get a picture of a leaf in the frame. So at the base of my hand is a whole leaf. So this whole thing here, these are all the leaflets. So it's pinnately compound, divided once into a feather-like segment of leaflets. And that's what pinnate comes from Latin for feather. So these leaves are kind of feathery. So my finger is at the tip of the leaf. Now I'm grabbing the whole leaf, and here's the leaf base. Here's the petiole, the leaflet, the stalk of leaflets, and there's the axil, and there's the leaf bud right there. So pinnately compound leaves. Great, again, graceful willow-like habit. Sometimes from a distance these trees can be maybe mixed up with willows or even native mesquites. But I would say this tree is probably a little more similar to mesquites with its compound leaves. But again, this is not related to the mesquites, which are in the pea family. So, another thing about these trees is they're very rugged, contorted, crazy, wavy, wrangled branch structure, which lends an air of ruggedness to what on the outside Looks graceful. As you see here. So the gracefulness is offset by the ruggedness of the branches. Very rugged tree, very rugged branch structure. So I'm going to get a couple pictures of the foliage, a couple pictures of the branches and the trees, and then I'll start talking about a couple more of the aspects of this tree. Alright, so I talked a little bit about the trunks, the stems, some of the crazy branching structures, the bark, and the foliage. But there's some other stuff to talk about. Flowers, fruit. Well, this tree, obviously being an angiosperm, a flowering plant, has flowers and has fruit. So, what do the flowers look like on Peruvian pepper trees? They're very small. You really have to look at them carefully to see the details. I'm going to try to get as much of a detail as I can because these are tiny flowers. This has both flowers and fruit on it. But what a perfect time to discuss the aspects of this tree. So, what I have in my hand is a panicle, an inflorescence, and the flowers are so tiny I can't even get the details on camera. But they are very small, white, 5-petaled flowers. Very tiny flowers. You look at them carefully, they're pretty nice to look at. They're just very hard to look at because they're tiny. You might even want to bring a magnifying glass with you to really look at these. But if I try to put a magnifying glass in front of my camera, it's going to look really dumb. So take my word for it. Small, 5-petaled white flowers. And then what happens is after the flowers are fertilized, I only start developing these berry-like drupes. And it's these here. Small, rounded berry-like drupes that are very pungently, fragrantly aromatic, as is the foliage of this tree. It has a sweet, spicy, and peppery aroma all slammed and sloshed together into one. It's actually a quite pleasant fragrance. And you don't have to crush a leaf or sniff the sap to smell it. Just standing under one of these trees, you could smell it. And sometimes a dried leaf litter, you stomp on it, it'll release some of that aroma. But I could smell it very clearly just standing under this tree. And the fruits are very fragrant. So if you crush one of these fruits, which I'm not going to do, is I'm going to let it develop its seeds naturally. Very fragrant. So, eventually, these fruits will mature in size. They're not going to get much larger than this. And then they're going to turn reddish when they're They're going to turn reddish when they are ripened. So they turn a red color. They're pretty cool. They're actually pretty attractive, and a lot of times you'll have fruit during the fall. And it's kind of a little bit of a festive display. This doesn't have a lot of fruit on it, a lot of ripened fruit. But again, here's a panicle of flowers. Here are the flowers again. It's very hard to get good detail, so I'll try to put it against the darker background of my hand so you can kind of see what the flower structures are like. The inflorescence, which is, again, a panicle. Very common in Anacardiaceae to have panicles of flowers like this. Again, really tiny, 5-petal white flowers, really tiny. Really have to look at them carefully to really get the details. And then before the flowers die off and turn into fruits, they kind of yellow and dull a little bit. So, and the panicles, as you see here, are dangling. These panicles that you can see are drooping, like the foliage and branches are very pendulous. And again, they ripen to a pinkish reddish color and then eventually dry and get really crumbly and then fall to the ground. And then the seeds are there for the next generation of trees. Now, and I use this as a cautionary tale. Some of our pepper trees have been used for their peppers as peppercorns. I believe there is a level of toxicity, especially if used in quantity, so I wouldn't jump out and try to do this unless you do a little more research on it. But I've heard that they have used pepper tree as substitute for peppercorns, or in addition to peppercorns, for seasoning. But again, a little more research is probably prudent in that. But it does have that very peppery fragrance to it. Yeah, very graceful trees. I'm gonna stop and take a couple more pictures of this. Just get some angle pictures and just try to get some pretty neat shots of these graceful trees. Okay, I want to talk about a little bit more about this tree. I've mentioned that this tree is very hardy, and that's very true. Peruvian pepper trees are very, very, very tough trees. Again, tolerating heat and drought, and are very good, are very well suited for low elevation Southern California climates, from seashore regions to even warmer low elevation desert areas, as this tree is not extremely hardy to cold, but can tolerate some temperatures near freezing at some points. But again, you don't want to keep this tree where it's going to get down in the teens and 20s at night. But this tree does have a little bit of a cold tolerance, and is very well suited for Mediterranean climates with dry seasons and wet seasons. It does make a good landscape tree if you're not expecting to grow a lawn under it. So if you're trying to grow this tree as an ornamental, just be prepared for a lot of leaf litter and twig litter and fruit litter. Very common. So it's going to be basically impossible to grow a lawn under here. So if you're going to have this tree in cultivation, you probably want to plant it where you're not going to want to have grass. It's right here. Even with the bit of rain that we had, is starting to sprout some of the annuals. There's not much litter. There's not much going on under here, except these are likely pepper tree seedlings, which will germinate sometimes underneath. So this is a good plant for south-facing slopes and dry slopes, and areas where you don't need a lawn. So for xeriscape landscape, xeriscape cultivation, drier areas, this is a pretty good tree. It's green all year. It's pretty lush looking all year. Has pretty cool little tiny flowers you kind of have to get close to look at. Satisfying silhouette, beautiful graceful weeping foliage belying the extremely rugged, gnarly branch structures and low swinging trunks that this tree has. So it has both elegance, grace, and wild ruggedness for your landscape. Now it's time for the caveats. Now for some people with really sensitive skin, this is in the cashew family. In the cashew family, a lot of plants have essential oils that could be irritating to your skin. And while this doesn't have the same properties as, say, Western poison oak, Toxicodendron diversilobum, which is native out here, and other poison oaks and poison ivies and poison sumacs. People with very sensitive skin might want to be a little extra careful, because again, this is a sumac and cashew family plant, and its sap might be kind of strong and a little irritant to some people. I don't believe that's really a huge problem. I've never had problems with pepper tree before, and I've been around these so many times in my life. But just a little public service announcements for people who might have very sensitive skin and might have prone to sumac and Cashew Family allergies. That's just a little thing there, especially the sap of the plant, especially the gummy sap. Okay, with that out of the way, there's another caveat I do need to bring up, is the propensity of this tree to naturalize outside and occasionally invade the wild landscape. This is not an extremely invasive species. It's not extremely invasive, but it does naturalize locally. As I'll zoom in here, right there, that is another Peruvian Peppertree, and there's another Peruvian Peppertree over there. So they do sometimes get out of bounds. It's a moderately common occurrence to see these in the wild. One place in Orange County near Fullerton is near the Nora Kuttner Trail. It's a nature preserve in Fullerton in the Coyote Hills, and there are a lot of pepper trees naturalized in the hillsides. A lot of them might have been landscaped, but they do escape sometimes, so you do have to kind of mind that, especially if you live near a wild area, just be careful. Just be careful with that. Now, these are not extremely invasive trees. They're not as invasive as its brother, the Brazilian Peppertree, which has smaller leaves but thicker leaflets, dark bluish green color, and not a weeping habit. And I'll cover that on another episode of Trees of San Diego County, in another episode, hopefully soon. That one is much more invasive, and that one is much more prone to be found in riparian habitats when it invades. But this one does occasionally locally naturalize, so just be prepared for that. It does occasionally spread out into the wildlands, but it's not, again, not as nearly invasive as its cousin, Schinus terebinthifolius, the Brazilian Peppertree. So just be mindful of that. It does have the propensity to spread out a little bit, so just keep it in bounds. But otherwise, just enjoy how graceful these trees are. If you're in a park, sometimes they plant these in parks, they plant these in business districts, and they plant them a lot on ranches. So one place you'll see these a lot. You'll see these planted a lot here in San Diego County and other parts of Southern California at low elevations, mostly below 2,500 feet. Much above that, they'd probably be too cold sensitive. A lot of historic ranches have these. One thing you'll notice is their juvenile leaves are a little thicker. This is what the juvenile foliage looks like on younger shoots and younger saplings. The leaflets are a little wider and less of a weeping habit until they get larger. So this is might be a root shoot, because these, in my next segment, my final segment, I want to talk a little bit about some other ways that they are pretty hardy. So I'm going to take another couple pictures and we'll get into that and wrap this video up. Alright, so I've mentioned that these trees can take a metaphorical beating. They can deal with long periods without rain, heat and drought, and even a little bit of a chill. Not a really deep freeze. Otherwise, this tree probably wouldn't do too well. But I pointed out in the last clip that this right here is apparently most likely a root shoot of this tree here. One way they can spread is vegetatively as well. Now, they've been known to drop their seeds, because these trees can produce very heavy crops of seeds and fruits, and they do quite often and quite regularly produce pretty heavy crops of seeds. However, their roots are also kind of invasive, so that's another caveat. Sometimes the roots are a bit invasive, and the roots are widespread. And the roots like to produce shoots. In other words, suckers. They call these suckers or root shoots. So they're almost a little bit rhizomatous, or rhizomatous, however you want to pronounce that. So they can produce root shoots. And that's pretty common with both this one and its cousin, the Brazilian pepper tree. In fact, the Brazilian pepper tree is much more colony forming. In other words, its roots spread out like crazy, and root shoots and suckers will pop up from the soil from that root system. Well, this tree can do it too. It's not quite as prevalent in my experience, but it can happen. So what happens is the roots are able to produce shoots. So another way that this tree can survive a lot of damage is to have its roots send up new stems. So that does happen. And I believe it does have enough of a root crown for it to resprout. I don't know if it resprouts too much from fire. I guess it's a possibility. I've never been around these in a fire area, but they can shoot up from the roots. So we'll see what a young pepper tree looks like. I think this one was probably planted here. I'm pretty sure this one was planted. Here's a young one. It's already starting to assume its graceful little form. It's a handsome little pepper tree. Handsome little guy. They can be quite vigorous growing. Pepper trees, vigorous growing, especially if they like where they are. So let's just admit how cool these are. Yes, again, caveats, the usual caveats about planting non-native trees, especially ones that do reseed and send up root shoots. Is the possibility of invasiveness. Again, the invasiveness on this one's a little more mild than its Brazilian pepper tree cousin, which can be extremely invasive and choke up waterways. This one you'll be more likely to find in the wild, in coastal sage scrub, disturbed grasslands. So again, I was telling you about the Nora Kuttner Trail in Fullerton. It goes through this park called the Robert E. Ward Nature Preserve. There are tons of these Peruvian pepper trees everywhere, all over the Coyote Hills in Fullerton in northwestern Orange County. I don't know if those were planted back in the day, because I know some of that area was used economically, so they might have landscaped some of them in there. But again, very hardy trees that can tolerate drought, heat, a little bit of chill, quite a bit of neglect, and are pretty low maintenance, except for the fact that you do sometimes want to trim them to keep them in check if your space is a little more limited. But otherwise, very cool tree. So that's going to wrap it up for the Trees of San Diego County episode. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Found it informative and helpful in identifying some of our landscape trees here in San Diego County, and Southern California. Thanks for watching this episode. See you on the next one. Enjoy.